You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is December 7th, 2025, and this is another episode of Lighthearted Light, where we look back at nearly 7 years of this podcast. Today we'll hear an edited version of an interview that was first heard in episode 127 back in July 2021. The conversation is with Lee Radzak, who was the longtime live-in caretaker at Split Rock Light in Minnesota. Split Rock Lighthouse is located on a 127-foot-high cliff on the northwest shore of Lake Superior. The lighthouse went into service on August 1st, 1910. After the Coast Guard discontinued it as an official aid to navigation in 1969, ownership was transferred to the state of Minnesota. The light station is now the centerpiece of 2,200-acre Split Rock Lighthouse State Park. Lee Radzak became the lighthouse site manager in November 1982. Over the next 36 years, he and his wife Jane raised a son and a daughter, marveled at the lake's beauty, endured gigantic storms, and answered the questions posed by more than 4 million visitors. After retiring in 2019, Lee began work on a new book, The View from Split Rock, A Lighthouse Keeper's Life. The book, which was co-written by journalist and author Kurt Brown, takes readers into the life of a modern-day lighthouse keeper at Split Rock. Let's listen to my conversation with Lee Radzak now. Let me ask you, what made you decide to write a book about your experiences at Split Rock Lighthouse?
Primarily, I guess it's because the Minnesota Historical Society Press asked if I would be interested in doing it. You know, over the last several years before I retired, people started saying, friends and just people I knew from work said, I'd tell them stories about Split Rock and they'd say, you should write a book. You've got enough stories. And apparently the press thought the same thing, and it was a unique and different enough job and enough unique things to write about that it became a book over the last 2 years since I retired. It was a good full year of writing anyway, and that it worked out pretty well because that was during a pandemic, and I could sit in front of the computer and spend a lot of time looking back at photographs of the last 36 years and records I had and put them all together.
Oh, it sounds like a perfect project for a pandemic. When you were back at the lighthouse living there over the years, did you keep a journal or notes along the way with the idea of writing a book at some point?
You know, I did keep a journal. I kept a daily log, actually, and right off the bat when I started in 1982, I hit the ground hard, reviewing all of the keepers' logs from Split Rock that over the years from 1910 they had kept their daily journals. And I thought, boy, that's a pretty astute thing to do. Nobody really said I had to do it, but I did it. Every day I would record what happened, what the weather was like, what preservation projects we were doing, what was getting painted, what colors, and what was getting fixed, and hiring staff and everything else. So for all those years, every year I kept a journal book and entered just pretty religiously every day. I'd enter something and then had that to go back and look back on when I was putting things together. So it was very helpful.
There's a lot of history of the light station and its keepers. It's not just about your experience, also a lot about the natural environment and wildlife there. So it's really a combination of those three things, your own experience, the history, and the natural environment. Was that kind of how you conceived it from the start, as being a combination of those things?
Yes, it was. I thought if I ever were to write something before I did write it, when I was thinking about what would people be interested in and who would be the audience for a book like this. And, of course, the visitation at Split Rock Lighthouse is so high. There's about 160,000 annual visitors that come there. And, of course, everybody recognizes photographs of it. And so there's the people that really love Lake Superior, the North Shore, and the lighthouse. There's people that love lighthouses in general and love the history of lighthouses. And there's people that like the nature and everything about it, the wildlife and the storms and what it's like living on the biggest body of fresh water in the world. So it really helped to look at it from those perspectives and what points I wanted to cover. And it was actually my wife's idea to break it down by seasons, because there is such a variety in the seasons, and the seasons on the North Shore Lake Superior can be different and are different than anywhere else. So it really was good to do it that way and to talk about the cycle of seasons at the lighthouse.
Right at the beginning of the book, you talk about when you started the tradition of lighting the lighthouse for the anniversary of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And that's become ever since you started, I think it's been a popular event every year. What made you decide to do that in the first place?
It was when the first year I did it on November 10th, it was the 10th anniversary of the Edmund Fitzgerald sailing out past the lighthouse out of Duluth Superior, going out into the storm, and sinking on the far end, on the eastern end of Lake Superior. What got it going was I was driving into November 10th on the North Shore. It was the end of tourist season, so it was pretty slow, pretty rainy, misty weather. And then, of course, I heard Gordon Lightfoot's song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, on the radio driving to town, and got me thinking about, that was exactly 10 years ago tonight that they sailed right along the North Shore and past the lighthouse here. And I thought, when I get back home, I think it's a fitting tribute to just turn the beacon on for a couple hours and right at sunset and leave it on till about 7 o'clock when the ship actually went down. And so I did that the first night. A few neighbors noticed it and asked about why I did it, and I explained it. And then the next year, a couple of people asked, are you going to do that again? I said, yeah, I think, it'd be nice to do it again. And then next year, a few people showed up, dropped in at the lighthouse, and it kind of just got legs that way, real slowly at first. And it took probably 5 years before we said, let's do a little kind of some kind of a ceremony, or at least formalize it a little more and invite people and do some media releases on the November 10th, the beacon's going to be lit. So the first time was 1985 on the 10th anniversary, and by the early 1990s, it had kind of become an event on its own. And we knew by then there was no going back, and that I had enough staff at the lighthouse by then that we could open up the new visitor center that had been built recently and do some events around that night and people in the dark. And it's after dark when the beacon's lit, so it's cold and it's rainy in November, and we wanted to make it a good experience for people. So and it's just gotten legs and kept going ever since.
Oh, it was an excellent idea. It's obviously a really nice memorial. It's also a great way for people to see that beautiful light in use, which, just to make it clear, the light was discontinued as an aid to navigation how long ago now?
1969. And we were very fortunate. Split Rock is really unusual in that the Coast Guard, they deemed it as obsolete. They decommissioned it, or deaccessioned it, as they call it, or disestablished it, I guess is the word that they technically use for it, in 1969. And they left the Fresnel lens in place, the third order bivalve lens, which usually, they pull them out right away due to vandalism and just being so exposed. But they knew that it was that the light station was going to be turned over to the state of Minnesota and maintained as a historic site. And that's kind of where I came in. It first started out as part of a very small state park on the North Shore, and then was turned over to the Minnesota Historical Society to operate. And in '82, then I became the site manager at the site.
Yeah, that is a great thing. The lens was left in place. They're nice in museums, but their natural environment is in the lighthouse itself. You have an unusual rotation system there, too, but I'm going to save that question for a few minutes from now. But I was thinking about the wildlife you write about in the book. Obviously, you saw a wide range of wildlife, birds and all kinds of mammals, all kinds of things during your stay there. Without doing any spoilers here, can you maybe give one or two examples of the most interesting wildlife encounters you had there?
Yeah, one thing that was always of interest to my family living there was bird migrations. course, most birds don't want to fly across Lake Superior because it's so large. So they follow the North Shore south down to Duluth and then fan out across the United States as they migrate south. So there's a huge hawk migration that comes along the North Shore, and that's really interesting to see that happen every year. Another really interesting thing, of course, in northern Minnesota, there's a lot of the big mammals are still around. Moose, black bear, timber wolves. We've seen all of those at the site. I've got pictures of them in the book. 10 years ago, in 2011, that there happened to be every 2 years the state of Minnesota legislature has to renew the budget, and they didn't get it done in time by July 1st, so they had to shut down the entire state government for 21 days in July, and part of that was closing state parks and historic sites. So middle of tourist season, middle of the summer, I couldn't let anybody on the site. So we spent 21 days there, just Jane and I and the kids, seeing what life was like for the early keepers with no people around, when there was no highway up the North Shore, when it was really wild. And a lot of the wildlife started coming back. We had a moose come right up to the base of the lighthouse and was grazing on Virginia creepers along the fence edge right outside our window. And yeah, it was interesting to see how quickly things reverted that way. So I write about some of that kind of thing in the book.
You just mentioned your kids, and we talked about them a bit in the last time I had you on the podcast, but let me just ask you again, your two children, John and Anna, were born during the time you were living at the lighthouse. Mm-hmm. How do you think growing up at a lighthouse like that in such a spectacular place, how did that make their childhood different from other kids, do you think?
For the first 10 years, of course, they didn't know anything different between where they lived and the kids in town. And it was similar, I guess, to kids who live on remote farms and that kind of thing, as they're isolated and they spend a lot of time keeping themselves entertained, and they were each other's best friends. And that continues to this day. And I think that was fostered by them living where they did. And we were a really close, tight-knit family. I think the high visitation and fishbowl syndrome, as they call it, added to that we were always kind of on display during the busy time of the year. And so in addition to being able to be good around the public and with people, they also, liked their privacy, wanted their privacy. So when winter came, it was a different story. It was a lot quieter, and we could have more family time together without a lot of interruptions. And John went on to work for DNR in the state park for 5 years in high school and a couple years of college. And Anna went on to major in environmental studies. So I think it had an impact on them in that way, that they appreciated nature and loved the setting.
I'm sure your attitude had a little bit to do with that, too. It kind of rubbed off on them, I'm sure.
Probably so, yeah. And I wanted the job because of where it was so close to nature, too. And that was something both Jane and I were anxious to move into and move away from the Twin Cities at the time.
So let's get back to the lens a little bit. Another thing you wrote about in the book that I found really interesting was the fact that the Fresnel lens at Split Rock rotates on a mercury bed, as many lighthouses used to have. That system was quite common. It's very rare now. In fact, I think Split Rock might be the only lighthouse in the U.S. that still has a lens that rotates on a mercury bed. Am I correct about that?
I'm almost certain that it's the only one that's left to be allowed to continue to do that. And it's because we're keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, I'm almost certain about that, too. So I was very interested to read about how you drained and cleaned the mercury a couple of times during your time there. I think I would have been a little nervous about that. But I guess you did some study before going ahead with that. But what was that experience like?
We actually did it twice. The first time was a couple of years after I started. And I knew, of course, that it was still floating and rotating on the mercury bearing, about 6 quarts of mercury in the base of the lens in the float bowl. I knew that it occasionally had to be cleaned, especially because the site manager that was there for a few years prior to me being there had put some motor oil on top of the the little bit of space where the mercury is exposed, he had heard that that's a way to seal it off from the environment and from evaporating into the air. Of course, that oil ends up collecting gunk and dead flies and dust, and so that's the main reason. Drained it. Myself and a maintenance man drained it and cleaned all the gunk and oil and everything out of it. The second time we did it was in 2009, and that was a much more, of course, by then we had the Minnesota Department of Health involved, the Pollution Control Agency. We jumped through a lot of hoops, did a lot of studying on what it would take to maintain it and to keep it there and keep it safe for all the people that visit there. So we had, at the time, it was Jim Woodward and Kurt Fosberg, who are two lampists, as official U.S. Coast Guard sanctioned lampists, who came and we contracted with them to help and Tyvek'd up, wore the Tyvek suits and the respirators and everything else, and drained the mercury out, cleaned all the float bowl and all the mechanisms and the pivot pins and everything else. And this time, our best knowledge was to put mineral oil on top instead of motor oil, because that does break down over time. Mineral oil, just a thin skim of mineral oil on top of a little bit of mercury exposed. And so that's what we did at that time, and that's what it's maintained today. And now I understand it won't have to be done for another 20 years or so if everything maintains itself. And of course, we inspected all of the bearings, and the original clockwork mechanism is still operating. That's what rotates it. Every 2 hours, the keeper or any staff, what I did when I turned it on was hand crank up that clockwork about 150 revolutions and bring those weights up to the top and let them drop. So it is, as far as I know, the only lighthouse in the country, in the United States, that operates totally on its original clockwork mechanism, its weight system, mercury float. The only thing that's different is that the kerosene incandescent oil vapor lamp has been replaced with a 1,000-watt incandescent light bulb. So that's what you see when it's turned on today.
Yeah, I'm almost certain it's the only one in the U.S. with those distinctions. To change the subject a bit, there's a part in the book where you talk about the beautiful night skies at Split Rock. What was so special about the night skies there, and how did they change over the years that you were there?
Well, what's really impressive about that far north in Minnesota is that northern Minnesota is, you get north of Duluth, and the lighthouse is about 45 miles north of Duluth up the North Shore. It's sparsely populated. A lot of it's boreal forest. There's not much for towns, a few small towns. So there's very little night lighting that, sprays and escapes into the night sky. So when you go out at night, it's dark. It's a star show, a light show like you wouldn't believe. And it's not just stars. It's the northern lights at certain times. It's the Milky Way. The satellites, at least for me, I was gone before these new, what's this line of satellites? It's been Starlink or something.
Is that Elon Musk's thing?
Yes. Yeah. And the new site manager up there has said that he's seen that on a couple of occasions, and it's pretty jarring compared to what you're usually seeing with a totally dark sky. And the way it's changed over the years is since the 1980s, of course, there's been a little bit more development, and the development that happens, there's the lighting. Some of it isn't done as carefully and with the thought of keeping dark skies. So there is, you look down towards Duluth and Two Harbors, Minnesota, and you can see a little bubble of light in the sky over those towns. And you look across the lake into Wisconsin, and you can see some light from Ashland, Wisconsin, Washburn, Wisconsin, Bayfield. But still, if you look out into mainly to the northeast into the big part of the lake, it's a black horizon as far as you can see, unless you see some of the 1,000-footers, some of the ore boats coming in with a line of lights lighting the horizon. But it's beautiful, and we really appreciate it. A good example is that when people called about the Edmund Fitzgerald event, and they were going to come up for it. And of course, that happened just after dark. We would have to remind them if they were coming up from the Twin Cities or other populated places, bring a flashlight, because if you have to park down in the state park, you're going to be bumping into trees and have your hands out in front of you. It gets so dark at night.
Yeah. 2 more quick questions for you. How's retired life treating you?
Well, retired life is good. We're away from the big lake. We're in central Minnesota, which is corn country, where Jane grew up. But it's beautiful. We took the pandemic pretty well. We were pretty used to isolation, and of course, the pandemic kind of made everybody lighthouse keepers, and that everybody had to isolate and watch their friends sail by like ships on the horizon and not be too close. But now that that's settling down and the book is settling down a little bit, we're able to start enjoying retirement and doing some of the things and getting back up to Split Rock and the North Shore. We still have a cabin in the area and still have a big connection with a lot of friends and relatives up in that area. So we'll keep that going.
So one final question for bonus points. What was your favorite part of working on the book?
Oh, boy. I guess, it's kind of a strange thing to spend that much time at a job and at a lighthouse and then try to encapsulate it in a book and to tell everything but not overtell it. And the fun was to go back and look at it again and kind of sum up what the experience was like, to try and look at it through other people's eyes and see what they'd be interested in. Yeah, it was good. I'm glad I saved all of my photographs and all of the records and documents I had, because it sure did come in handy. Congratulations again on the book being published. Thank you so much for being with me today, Lee, and I hope we can do it again sometime. Great, Jeremy. I always enjoyed talking to you, and it was fun to see you again.
Lee Radzak's book, The View from Split Rock, A Lighthouse Keeper's Life, is available on Amazon. If you hurry, there's still time to get it as a Christmas gift for a lighthouse nut in your life, maybe for yourself. Remember to check out uslhs.org to learn about all the things the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers. Donations and memberships help support this podcast. We will be back with a new episode next week about Fairport Harbor Light in Ohio. Until then, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thank you so much for listening, and keep a good light.